أعزائي المشاهدين، أهلا بكم في هذا الحوار الخاص مع السيد باتريك سميث، وهو كاتب ومعلق سياسي وصحفي متخصص بالشؤون الخارجية والإعلام. صدر له مؤخرا كتابه الخامس بعنوان الوقت ينفذ، أمريكيون بعد القرن الأمريكي، Time No Longer, Americans After the American Century. تنشر له مقالات أسبوعية، وعمل مراسلا ومعلقا لما يزيد عن عقدين خارج الولايات المتحدة في صحيفة International Herald Tribune ومجلة نيويوركر، كما نشرت له عدة صحف أمريكية مقالات تناولت الشؤون الخارجية منها نيويورك تايمز، بزنس ويك ومجلة تايم. أبرز مؤلفاته الأخرى إنه قرن للآخرين، واليابان إعادة تفسير، في مقال أخير نشر السيد سميث على موقع salon.com بعنوان لن ينقذنا الرب، التاريخ الحقيقي والمجمع الصناعي الحربي الجديد. تناول فيه ما وصفه الانقلاب الخفي أو الصامت silent coup، متسائلا هل أن بلدنا العظيم شهد انزياحا في القوة لدرجة أن الذين يحتلون أعلى المناصب العسكرية والاستخبارية والأمن أصبحوا خارج سيطرة المدنيين ويتصرفون على هواهم باسمنا؟ في كتابه الأخير يثير السيد باتريك قضايا أمريكية حساسة وهامة، وسنحاول مناقشتها معه بما يتيسر لنا من الوقت. هذه القضايا تشمل مقولات الاستثنائية الأمريكية، القرن الأمريكي، التاريخ والأسطورة في الخبرة الأمريكية، الإمبراطورية الأمريكية أو أمريكا التي لا يمكن الاستغناء عنها، التراجع الأمريكي، الحرب الباردة، هذا التراجع الأمريكي نسبي أم مطلق؟ لماذا خيب أوباما الآمال بالتغيير؟ ما هو مستقبل الدور الأمريكي؟ يسرني استضافتك في هذا اللقاء الأول على شاشة الميادين، وسيسعد المشاهدين أكثر أن نوفر لهم في هذا اللقاء فهما أفضل لمفاهيم وخلفيات ومقولات تفسر المسار الأمريكي نحو المرحلة المقبلة. أجدد ترحيبي بكم سيد سميث. Mr. Smith, welcome to Mayadeen.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here.
Great. In your article about the Memorial Day,
Yes.
you mentioned the silent coup. The thought comes as a question, not as a thesis. Has our great country undergone a shift in power such that those at the very top of our defense, intelligence, and security apparatus are beyond civilian control and act autonomously in our name? Shorten the version of the question, who is in charge in this country now? What do you mean by that?
Well, the phrase is a strong phrase. That is why I posed it as a question instead of terming it a thesis, okay? What I mean, there are a number of ways to answer that. We have, maybe we can identify a moment, as I suggested later in that column, when something happened such that it became evident, it rose to the surface that our various institutions, having mostly defense and security and intelligence, are not subject to political control, right? This is so in one case after another, all right? Now, does it represent a silent coup? This is my question, okay? One of my readers, I identified a moment during the George Bush administration when the White House was kept in the dark while the National Security Agency manipulated standing regulation governing wiretapping and so forth, right? The political authority was not told until after it was accomplished, right? The authority was put in place. So we can maybe consider moments, but one of my readers came back and said, well, okay, silent coup, but that's when Kennedy was assassinated. I thought, well, I hadn't really considered that. Possibly that's so, actually, rather more graphically. But I think maybe the more useful answer is to think about what some call deep government, the bureaucratization of various functions over a long, long period of time, and this is almost certainly not America's problem alone, right? And the phenomenon where institutions of government answer to their own constituencies as a question of just inertia, right? What is in place remains in place, right? So I think the coup thought is worth considering. I remain pleased I put it in the form of a question. I think it's vital to ask it under this Obama administration, right? It's very unclear what this man is able to decide for himself. But probably for quite a long time before Obama, we had a certain autonomy, a certain autonomous characteristic moving through our institutions such that administrations come and go. They keep doing what they're doing, especially in regard to the intelligence people.
We're going to go back to the Obama administration probably toward the end of this conversation because it's worth discussing why his change did not occur in the way that people expected. But in your book, Time No Longer, American After the American Century, you stated Americans have from the start trained to accept simplistic myth as truth. And you discussed the difference between myth and history. And you recited some of the myths like providential nation, chosen people, city upon the hill, a new world that was a beacon to the rest of humanity, unique exceptionalism, indispensable country. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, without much difficulty, actually. Those two terms are really contain the thesis of the book, and if my own thinking right now has a core thesis, that's it. Okay, there are two roots I identify as the roots of, let's say, American consciousness, the American way of thinking. One is myth, we call it. All right, we're talking about the early years and decades of this country's founding, 17th century. Okay, the Puritans came over. Basically, religious sects were. This is a pre-independence, right? Their notion of what we were doing, what they were doing, was this providential thing. It was. They had discovered a new world. That's a very powerful term. We use it all the time, but you have to think about that. They thought they had found a new world, and it was their conceptions were mythical. They were religious, and this carried through for a very long time. It's still with us today. At the other end of the chain, the Tea Party is the Tea Party is the heir of this line of thought. Okay. 18th century, this country was founded in the War of Independence. The development of political institutions, administrative institutions, and so forth. This is history, all right? This is going to be a country that exists in time, right? It is going to be a human creation, all right? Not a providential creation. And that's the other root of our American consciousness. And it's a nice, clean explanation. I don't think it's overly simple, but I find it useful in its clarity. The inheritors of the heirs of the historical conception of American thinking would be the Democratic Party and labor and activists and so forth. We, not Providence, are in control of our institutions and what happens to this country. There's nothing preordained. The hand of God is not watching over us. We have to make decisions, okay? This is historical thinking. A very excellent professor at Princeton named Karl Schorska wrote a book called Thinking with History. This is what Americans need to do. And I'll conclude this reply by saying we don't do a very great deal of it. The mythical notion, it's driving us into the wars that remain in our headlines and so on and so forth. We draw from it the right to do this and that and the other because we are doing it and we are right, you know. So myth and history, I find those, to set those up as the poles of our consciousness is useful, I think. That was the project of the book.
Well, that will lead me to something else that you mentioned in your book about the Cold War and the Cold War man under that title. No period, you said, no period of American history can be counted so extreme in its assumptions as the Cold War decades. The assumption of moral superiority, the assumption of right and prerogative beyond law, the assumption of divine dispensation. That's related to the myth in a way, but I would like you to elaborate on that period of the Cold War and why you concluded that.
Well, the term Cold War man I borrowed from a scholar a really excellent scholar who teaches at Notre Dame. What I meant by taking it, I mean it's sort of Peking man and this sort of thing. Cold War man, a new kind of human species, right, or American species. But I wanted to elucidate the extent to which the Cold War was primarily an extreme expression, an extreme rendering of the mythical American consciousness from the very beginning. In a certain way, it was very new. It was really a passage in human history one hopes is not repeated, although we seem determined right now to begin all over again. But so it was in that way, I shy from the word unique, but let's say remarkable or unusual. However, the other side of the moon on that is it was a logical outcome of American thinking, and really at a certain point you have to leave off the word thinking. You have to get American belief, right, which is different than thinking, since the 17th century, right? So
many they also, in line of this discussion, they consider that America won the Cold War because of the disintegration of the Soviet Union. Yeah. And they enjoy talking about the sole superpower. But in your book, you alluded to many things that the United States should not be thinking or concluding that they won because there was many heavy price for humanity.
They were two losers. There were many losers. All of the people who, during the Cold War decades, paid a price. My mind goes first to those nations, those governments, those people who elected not to define themselves in the framework of East-West conflict. The Iranians, we know these stories, right? Mossadegh, Arbenz in Guatemala, he was a proper social democrat, no more. But he wasn't. These people and many others like him were not. Nehru. These giants of the independence era, I admire them greatly. Right? These societies paid, right? However, coming back to the question of winning, I don't think you can speak of a winner. Have you visited an American public school lately, or driven on an American highway?
Of course.
This is the nation that won the Cold War. That's the price we paid. We can't even connect those dots. As to the Soviets, nothing of that magnitude. A first-year student in history knows nothing of that magnitude occurs in a society of that, let's say, density because of an outside imposition. There are superb books written by Russian historians saying the crumbling began quite early, late 20s, early 30s, and they trace it all the way up. That was an internal collapse. At the max, the Reagan administration acted as a catalyst in a process already running.
We were discussing the issue of the Cold War.
Yes.
And there was also an interesting issue related to whether the United States is an empire or not. Of course, many people think that it is an empire and there is no need to discuss this subject, although even Obama, we talked about Obama, tried to deny being an empire in his famous speech at Cairo.
Yeah.
But you alluded to the issue of empire in the book and talking about the fading of empires and great nation always reflects internal weaknesses and decay. Americans may learn this for themselves over the next couple of decades. As if you are predicting here, first of all, you're not denying that this is an empire. Second, you're talking about a matter of decades for this empire to crumble or something. What do you think?
Is it an empire? Well, the scholars have picked this apart for quite a long time. It is not an empire in the traditional 19th century sense. It's not based on territorial dominion, right? However, the projection of power that America awards itself is imperial. Okay, in the 90s, if you use the word empire in one of our newspapers, you were going to invite some trouble. Okay, this was a very inflammatory term. It defined you as much in the face of the opinion of mainstream editors as much as it defined the phenomenon you're talking about, right? Then we had the notion of, I just love this, the benevolent hegemon. I have never heard of a benevolent hegemon, and I don't think it's possible that one could ever exist, right? So we began in the late 90s to inch toward the reality we have today. It's not any longer the off-limits term it used to be. I don't think there's I don't think there's a great deal of dispute about this, all right? Our need now is to adjust to a world that requires us to leave off our imperial ambitions and these various forms of imperial behavior that we have permitted ourselves, all right? In that sense, I give us 2.5 decades starting from 2001, all right? And I don't think we have spent the first half of that period. I suppose we're about halfway now. I don't think we've spent the first half of that period very constructively, right?
So what would be the final act of that empire? What would be the sign that this is the end of the empire?
Right. I date the end of the American century to September 11th. Mm-hmm. Rather oddly abrupt, rather oddly instantaneous. But you cannot say that we determined at that point to alter our behavior. We didn't. We had a chance to. The autumn of 2001 was a very memorable period. I try to take it apart a little bit in the book. There was a period of doubt and questioning and confusion I found altogether salutary. It was the best thing we could have done. And that period came to an end with the January 2002 Axis of Evil speech. You're with us or against us, that's it. We're going to continue behaving as we did, only more so, right? What could the final act be? I would say an act of self-recognition, a determination to see the world clearly and not as we wish it were, right? And then a reimagination of our place in it. We have those choices on paper, so to say. We have those choices. I cannot say there is a great deal of evidence we're going to exercise them, but they are there, and we could do that. I say in the book, I am not a declinist. I love this country. I think it's given humanity our greatest gift were these ideals that everybody admires, right? Ho read Thomas Jefferson, etc. Our task is to begin living up to them more than we have. That's what we need to do.
We're going to talk about the decline, whether relative or absolute,
yes,
or not. But mentioning September, really, you also stated that on September 11, all claims to immunity or exception, its dream of eternal triumph had been ruptured. So in a way that you really stating that the end of American century occurred then, why many people still think that it was kind of conspiracy what happened there? Is it something that manufactured, or at least some people doubting whether it was facilitated to occur, and that will lead to
the events?
Yes.
I don't have any opinion on that. I've heard these sort of theories. I don't think it's a little bit like the Kennedy assassination. We'll never get to the bottom of that, right? I can't claim to have any.
But what do you think, why the investigation that occurred, especially with the Congress, etc., to respond to the question how it did happen, not why it did happen?
How it happened.
They only concentrate on how it did happen.
Yeah, not
how
why.
Come it did happen.
Well, okay, good. The missing piece then was instantly evident. Causality. We were going to eliminate all discussion of causality. There's a conservative intellectual, I suppose he gets away with the term, named Richard Pearl. All right, he was kind of a theorist for the Bush administration neoconservatives. We must decontextualize terror, he said, quite famously. Any attempt to understand it is to justify it. You got to think about this, right? What we need to do is treat it as a crime and no more. All right, these terms, crime, terror, they eliminate the obligation to analyze a phenomenon and put it in historical context. A terrorist, I object to this term. A terrorist is somebody who has only two dimensions. He or she is just there. You don't have to understand that person. You have to eliminate that person, right? This was what we went into. And it was an expression of our allergy to causality, our allergy to thinking, again, thinking with history. These people didn't come out of nowhere. They weren't sitting around and decided one day, let's become terrorists. No. Obviously, it's an elementary point in our conversation, but as a country, we have eliminated that whole line of logic. I just went to the 9/11 Museum in New York, a remarkable place, and it's very problematic. In good measure for this reason, there is no effort to understand what happened. The project is to keep us eternally in a state of grief, anger, desire for revenge, and so on and so forth, right? So it's very two-dimensional in terms of the psychology, the emotional structures it's inviting us to enter upon. I wrote a column saying, I'm sorry, I cannot mourn in the way I am invited to mourn there.
سنتابع حوارنا مع السيد سميث بعد فاصل قصير. ابقوا معنا. أعزائي المشاهدين، نتابع حوارنا مع السيد سميث حول قضايا تتعلق بالشأن الأمريكي. Well, since we're mentioning the September 11 and now there is the issue of terrorist organization like Daesh and others now and the policy of United States from the Bush administration to Obama. What's happening currently in Syria and in Iraq and growing danger of extremism and organization that are considered terrorist. If this war and terror that Obama was trying to end it, saying we cannot be in constant open-end war, etc. But at the same time, we see that the administration is conducting similar tactics and strategy despite announcing otherwise.
We go back to the silent coup thesis, okay? Think about our topic at this moment in relation to what we said a few minutes ago, okay? In May of last year, Obama announced, this war, like all wars, must draw to a close, right? This is a very big speech, National Defense University. Note the location of the speech. A year later, West Point, note again who he chooses to address these matters with, right? We have a war on terror and it's going to go on for the foreseeable future. What happened in that year? Well, this is what I mean about institutional momentum, right? And institutional autonomy. I really did have to step back after the West Point speech and say, is this man in charge of these? I believed him at National Defense University when he said we must draw this war to a close. I think that was Obama speaking, okay? At West Point, why? He had somehow, the word's not too strong, some kind of capitulation over the previous year. Why?
Why do you think?
Why do I think?
Yeah.
The convictions, maybe the ideological frame within which our military and intelligence institutions view the world, right? Generals, very high people at National Security Agency, numerous advisors on the National Security Council, etc. The universities are full of these people. The scholarly comment you get on all these questions is or many of them is absolutely no different from what you get coming out of government. It's just reinforcement. Somebody says 3 and 2 is 5, and then you go get a scholar and he'll say 2 and 3 is 5. You know, are we hearing any kind of alternative analysis of these things? No.
So what's your take also about the Snowden issue and the NSA spying on Americans and on foreigners and this kind of national security state that has been there, but it was exposed.
Surveillance, national, I call it surveillance state. right? I haven't met one person who has been able to identify a single thing Snowden has revealed that anybody regrets knowing. Can you think of something where you say, gosh, I wish I didn't know that? I can't, all right? I take from this revelation of, the true revelation was extent, right? The true revelation was extent and capacity, right? I take a few things away from it as core themes. One is our insatiable, unsatisfiable fear of others, right? Our fear of internal decay and external threat, right? It goes back to the founding. It goes back to the 18th century. It's just it's in the water we drink, right? We have to face that. You can't live that way, right? The other thing is our belief in technology and innovation. If we can do it, it should be done. I don't think so, right? These applications, NSA, and indeed the Silicon Valley companies, they can tell you what kind of, they know what you had for dinner last night, right? All this sort of crazy intrusions in our lives. It's just because we believe it's our interpretation of progress, right? It's the way we interpret progress. We can do this, so let's do it. That's progress.
Well, Obama has been a disappointment.
Yes.
If in other way of describing what you alluded in your book too, and in some of your writings. Why do you think Obama turned to be such a disappointment and not being able to achieve many of the things he promised? On the top of the thing to close Guantanamo, for instance, he said in the first year, I'm going to do this and I'm going to end the wars. And we see that he still, despite completing withdrawal from Iraq and trying to finish also withdrawal, but he's still engaged more in Afghanistan. And he's still, the policy of the United States toward Ukraine and toward Russia and China and toward in the Middle East does not add to changing of the policy.
Yeah. Why? I think one's initial impulse, certainly mine, I'm profoundly disappointed in Obama more than that. I'm repelled by what his administration has turned out to be. Support for various coups here and there, behaving like the Dulles brothers, really.
You mean John Foster Dulles?
Yeah, John Foster and Allen, right?
And Allen Dulles.
Right. The coups, I count Egypt. Nobody wants to say so, but we gave permission for that. It's on the record. Ukraine, same. The fiction is we didn't have anything to do with it. Of course we did. It's on the record. It's right there.
Mr. Smith, we were discussing before we went to the break the disappointment that we felt and you felt about Obama and not being able to achieve many of the things that he set out to, or promised to do it.
Yeah.
What do you think the obstacle that made him fail so far?
Well, as I started to say, I think one's impulse is to find a reason. There must be a reason for this. When he was elected, I happened to be in Hong Kong. I wept when he was elected. It was an enormous moment it was a moment of sort of redress. You know, it was America correcting a very long historical wrong, right?
It reminded you a little bit of Kennedy period.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. You know, an African American in the White House. What could be sweeter, right? What could express the best of us so clearly, right? So you look for a reason over time, but I've concluded there isn't one reason. There are any number of reasons. Okay, He named Robert Gates his defense secretary quite quickly, holdover from the Bush administration. You started saying right away, now wait a minute, Mr. President-elect, I thought you were on to the matter of change. Gates is not interested in changing the American military posture. Look at what he says and does, right? And now the record speaks for itself. So you began to think of, again, this is why I go back to these things, institutional power, right? The machinery of power, right? I think proved a little too much for him. I think he was rather naive about that. I think he did intend to close Guantanamo. He just can't, right? And then on the political side, we have a kind of paralysis that goes straight to my thesis. Every time I read the newspapers, I think of ways in which my thesis is confirmed, right? We have a mythical conception of what this country is supposed to be doing, and we have people who are saying, no, we live in history now, right? We're not outside of time. There's nothing eternal about anything we're doing. We have decisions to make. These people think historically. And Obama, I think, was in that camp. But the politics they're not good. They're not healthy. I think this country is, we go to a third thing. I think he underestimated the anxiety Americans have felt, certainly since 2001, probably further back. What are we supposed to do? Where is our primacy going, right? Can we maintain it?
You know, our audience are interested sometimes in seeing how United States administration conduct its policy toward the region, the Arab-Israeli conflict, the regional issue. And they always assume that the Zionist lobby in the United States has control on U.S. foreign policy in the region. And they don't see it as something as American interest. They see that it's putting Israeli interest in advance of the American interest. Mm-hmm. Have you thought about this, and what's your take on that?
Well, it's very difficult in the American context to discuss the machinery of Israeli influence, okay? Primarily because anywhere that might be available as a forum to discuss it is subject to that influence, okay? It's the sort of catch-22 of the whole situation, right? AIPAC, the Israeli lobby, is an enormously powerful institution, right? These people are very determined. They have their goals. Their goals are to do all possible to protect Israel. One understands that, all right? But the intrusion in the American political process is not right. It's just not right.
How this can be corrected, this intrusion?
It's very difficult. I think you need leadership who are able to step back and say, over the past however many years you want to consider, we have led this country, or we and our predecessors have led this country into a very serious fix as far as power and who holds it and how it is influenced. It's not just the Israeli lobby. It's all, look at these Supreme Court decisions basically giving people the permission to purchase elections. It's not going to do us any good, right? But we need people who can step back from that. Who are they? I can't answer that, Moonzo.
You're talking about Al Gore and Bush. The Supreme Court gave the...
No, I'm talking about Supreme Court decisions just recently permitting...
the financial...
The financial, political...
Funding unlimited from private...
This is among the very biggest roots of our problem, is money in politics, you know.
In the primary in Virginia, which is Cantor lost, he spent $5 million. This is inside the Republican Party primary. That's an indication of...
So who are the people who are going to fix this? Well, they are currently people who are under the influence of lobbies. Again, not just AIPAC, all kinds of lobbies, corporate lobbies, political lobbies.
Do you think the people in charge, whether the people behind the silent coup or others, the corporate business, the technocrat, the military-industrial complex, etc., etc., do you think they have interest or they are capable of realizing that the relative decline, if we want to use that, or adjustment in your terms, is something that need to be done to save United States from absolute decline?
These institutions you enumerated, okay, they don't have a sufficiently broad perspective. The vision is very narrow, and corporations understand the world by way of corporate interests, okay? The military understands the world by way of what militaries are supposed to do. And you go up the pyramid, the senior leadership is not sufficient to marshal these institutions in a new direction, right? And say, look, okay, it's fine your interests, but we have larger jobs now. We have to get them done. It needs a lot of big thinking, a lot of reimagination, a lot of courage, right? And this is what's missing, leadership.
Well, from both parties, you mean?
Yeah.
Or especially from the Democratic Party.
Look, the way Obama's behaved, I'm not sure it's any longer of much interest to distinguish one party from another. Right? On the domestic side, okay, he's done some things. Not enough, but some. Every time you turn around, he's chipping away at his Affordable Care Act until I just went to my health insurance expired. All right, I'm an independent writer, so I buy my own health insurance. I just went to an insurance broker and went for my little shot at Obamacare. It cost me more than the policy that just expired. It doesn't mean I'm very happy for the millions of people who earn very little and so on. They're good. That who can do other than applaud. But even his accomplishments are blunted.
Mr. Smith, you spend a lot of time outside the country in countries like Japan, China.
Yeah.
India. You visited a lot of country. We were talking about the relative decline and absolute decline. We're talking about a world system now. United States is no longer the sole superpower, although some people, they want to.
They insist.
They insist on it. And we see the rise of China, the coming back of Russia, and the rise also of other countries like India, etc. What kind of lessons you learn from being exposed to other culture, to Asia? And what is your take on the potential for a new world system that's different than we have right now or we had during the Cold War?
I was 30 years abroad, mostly in Asia, okay? Elsewhere, but mostly in Asia. This time, these people gave me a really splendid gift. They taught me to see from the perspective of others, right? They taught me to see myself and I spent 30 years, I was a correspondent, constantly asking questions about other people. After a long time, I realized whatever they're telling me, they're also telling me about myself, right? They're telling me about who I am. They're telling me about what my country is and what it looks like to others. This was my gift. But it look at all those years. Americans typically don't have that privilege, and it was a privilege for me, right? So it's perspective, right? It's detachment sufficient to see clearly others, to appreciate to understand the perspective of others and to see from their eyes is, I consider, one of the most fundamental projects of the 21st century. I really hope we can get it done. And Easterners, using the term very broadly, are rather gifted in this way because they had to. The centuries of Western dominance required people, non-Western people, to see what they had to understand their world. They had to understand power in it, and they had to understand their place. This was a very painful passage all this time I'm talking about in many respects. But now it comes as an advantage, right? Perspective, right?
Well, I understand that we're out of time, unfortunately, and thank you very much, Patrick, for this interview, for being with us.
You're welcome.
أعزائي المشاهدين، شكرا جزيلا لإصغائكم، وإلى اللقاء في حوارات قادمة.